Hello, everybody, and welcome to Reading Epic Threads. I'm sorry I've been absent. I've been taking care of my wife while she recovers from surgery and doing some other stuff on the product development end. So I've been out, and I'm going to continue to be here on a limited basis, probably for the next week, maybe even 2 weeks. But don't worry, I will be getting back to normal and perhaps even extended operations on the Reading Epic Threads front coming soon. In the meantime, I didn't want to be completely absent. There's a new Erik Carlson piece available, and I'm going to read it to you right now, commercial free. From ericc.substack.com, Seinfeld, Friends, and Sex in the City. A continuation of Christian values are now considered vile. By Erik Carlson. In a previous piece I wrote, Christian values are now considered vile. I pointed out that during the 1990s, a shift occurred. Christian values were no longer considered virtuous to the extent they were in prior decades, or centuries for that matter. Christian values became somewhat neutral, with other values gaining ground, things like political correctness, LGBT adoration, and the adherence to climate change became equal rivals with Christian values. Eventually, other values overtook Christian values in the narratives pushed in American society, and Christian values started to be viewed as oppressive and hateful. We didn't go from point A to point Z overnight. There was a gradual manipulation that occurred. Just as gateway drugs tend to be used before someone becomes a heroin addict, we were gradually led away from Christian values. People didn't just wake up one day and believe men could get pregnant. NBC show Seinfeld is my favorite sitcom of all time. I liked Friends, but probably only watched a season or two of it. Sex and the City was not my cup of tea at all. The idea of a group of superficial women romping around the Big Apple having casual sex is not something that interests me now. It didn't really interest me at any time in my life. Seinfeld debuted in 1989, Friends in 1994, and Sex and the City in 1998. One could look at this as a steady progression of immorality and values. They all have some important and intentional things in common with each other. Yes, they all took place in New York City. Yes, they all debuted within a decade of each other. Yes, they were all wildly successful shows that influenced generations and future generations, but there is something more nefarious about them. Seinfeld. While Seinfeld debuted in 1989, it seems like it took a couple of years really to catch on, maybe for society to be ready for it. But once it caught on, much of the country was addicted to it. It was water cooler conversation every Friday morning in offices around the nation. Every episode seemed to have a memorable line or storyline. Some had multiple. Ironically, Jerry Seinfeld's character never had a job in any office, yet his show was talked about on casual Fridays in offices throughout the country. I understand that everyone reading this is probably fully aware of the premise of the show, but please indulge me while I set up my point. Jerry Seinfeld is a stand-up comedian who has an odd next-door neighbor named Kramer who doesn't seem to need to work. Jerry's best friend growing up is a loser named George, and Jerry's ex-girlfriend, Elaine, is still a close friend. Together, the four are inseparable. This group of single 30-somethings turns into a group of single 40-somethings. Jerry and Kramer never have a relationship with a woman that seems to last more than a couple of weeks. Jerry always finds something wrong with everyone he dates. Elaine did have a long-term relationship, but she had to break up with him because she discovered he liked Christian rock music. George got engaged, but his fiancée famously died licking toxic wedding invitation envelopes before their wedding. Subliminal message: marriage kills. George only asked Susan, his fiancée, to marry him because he made a pact with Jerry to both get married. Jerry, of course, backed out of his end of the deal. In other words, George never really wanted to get married. He preferred to stay single, but felt forced into it by peer pressure. An influential hit show that most people liked and some adored, about a group of friends who never get married or have children. While the show wasn't overly raunchy, God or faith were not a part of any of the main characters' lives. Marriages were portrayed as prison sentences, especially George's parents. When the group's friends got married, it was an annoyance to them. They needed to get them a wedding present and attend their parties and weddings. When their friends had children, they felt forced to go see them while they were still babies. Children in general on the show were seen as an annoyance. 4 close friends whom I can't recall ever once discussing the possibility of having kids one day. Don't get me wrong. I love Seinfeld. I think it is comedy genius, but I now understand that in the backdrop of this comedy genius, a narrative is being pushed, a narrative that diminishes the traditional life of getting married and having children. The show promotes living a perpetual life of adolescence. Friends. A group of 3 attractive men and women in their 20s. This group lives together, hangs out together, and is in and out of romantic relationships with each other, all the while maintaining their friendships with each other, always there for each other. Like Seinfeld, marriage isn't an honored institution. A failed marriage, a child being raised by an ex-wife turned lesbian, subject matters that the public wasn't ready for just a few years prior. While Seinfeld probably wasn't appreciated by many people under the age of 25, Friends had a strong following of people in their teenage years, even younger, more impressionable years. As with Seinfeld, I'm not saying Friends wasn't entertaining, just that there was more to it than just romance and comedy. A generation was being conditioned. The idea of getting married, having children, and being successful was being replaced with the alternative idea of just having fun, hanging out with your friends, and enjoying your life without responsibilities that might weigh you down. Friends makes it seem that one could have a romantic relationship with a friend, end it, remain good friends, and start up a new romantic relationship with another friend. The friend you were dating could even start to date one of your other friends. They make it seem less complicated and damaging than it really is. What they don't know is the emotional scars that are formed from this type of lifestyle. What they don't know is a group of 40-somethings 20 years later whose lives are a mess. They kind of ride off into the sunset before their meaningless and unfulfilled lives start to bubble over. They could have changed course later in life. Who knows? We weren't there to see it. Sex and the City. A group of superficial female friends living in New York City, sleeping around, eating at the best restaurants, wearing the most expensive and fashionable clothes, all the while sharing their sexual escapades with each. No shame to be found anywhere. Like I said, this show was not my cup of tea, and I didn't watch more than a couple of episodes. My wife watched this show when she was younger, as well as Friends. In fact, she lived in New York City from the mid-1990s to the early 2000s while these shows were in their prime. While my future wife didn't live the immoral lifestyle of the cast of Sex and the City, it's impossible to think the show didn't affect her or the show Friends, or to believe that Seinfeld didn't affect me. My wife spent most of her 20s in New York City, sharing apartments and houses with friends, experiencing all that New York City had to offer, wearing designer clothes, carrying designer bags, and eating at the Michelin star restaurants. Were these shows a reflection of society, or did they mold society? I would argue that it's the latter, maybe a little bit of a reflection, but mostly molding society. I believe society was being molded through entertainment. Remove God from society, destroy the traditional family and marriage, all communist ideas, eugenics, population control, all of it comes into play, all led by the same people. While we are being entertained, we are being reshaped and molded into what the elites want us to be. Compliant, controlled, non-reproducing, or delayed reproducing worker bees. If one looks at me and my wife as examples, we got married when I was 38 and she was 33. The only marriage for both of us. We started having kids when I was 40 and she was 35. We had to hurry. The clock was ticking. I would be lying if I said the first 37 years of my life were focused on the most important things, getting married and raising families. I was busy traveling to Europe, hanging out with my friends and experiencing life. I should point out I was not alone. Getting married and having kids this late in life isn't that uncommon these days. Half of the dads at my kids' school and sporting events are my age or older than me. I don't believe that the people of my generation just independently decided to delay marriage and children. I believe it is an agenda that was pushed on us without us understanding that it was happening, pushed on us through entertainment, adolescence being extended and glorified, pushed on us by economic pressures that make it harder to start a family earlier. We go to school longer and have more debt because of it. It's even worse now. Many people in their 20s are addicted to video games and porn, literally living in their mother's basements because the cost of living is too high to live on their own, even with roommates. What would have happened to me and my wife if we hadn't consumed the entertainment we consumed in our 20s? What if shows like The Waltons, Little House on the Prairie, Father Knows Best, or Leave It to Beaver were aired when we were in our 20s? Would we have gotten married a decade earlier? Would we have had children a decade earlier? What if economic conditions were more conducive to buying a house and starting a family? What if superficial spending and life experiences weren't glorified so much? If I think about it, post-World War II, when the elites needed us to repopulate the country to drive up production in the American economy, entertainment was filled with shows and movies about traditional families and marriage. In the 1970s and 1980s, divorce, blended and broken families, as well as single parents, became common. In the 1990s, marriage and children were viewed as a prison sentence in shows like Married with Children and The Simpsons. Shows like Seinfeld, Friends, and Sex and the City gave us an alternative to marriage and traditional family. They prolonged adolescence. It's impossible to believe our entertainment hasn't affected our view of marriage and children. It's impossible to believe our entertainment hasn't been created to alter our view of marriage and children. Entertainment is designed to alter our perception and acceptance of everything the elite Kabbalists want us to believe. By the way, guess what else came out the same year Sex and the City debuted in 1998? Will and Grace. Don't even get me started with that. All right, that is one piece, and we are only 13 minutes into the show. I am not going to do a Reading Epic Threads that short, so let's do another piece. I'm Seth Keshel, and we'll get to it right now as I begin recording. A Captain's Morning Note to Morning Joe. Topic: Perspective by Captain Seth Keshel. Dear Morning Joe Scarborough, I do not write on behalf of all veterans or current military personnel, but I am confident that the vast majority of them would vouch for what I am communicating to you in this morning as the unbridled truth. Here, I speak for myself. Consider this message to you a repudiation of your reckless commentary from Tuesday night, when the right side of the political uniparty lost its last hope to ensuring our enduring bureaucracy has both mainstream presidential candidates under its control this November. Now you're going to have to steal it again, if you can. In case you're drawing a blank, here is the dialogue between you and your wife Tuesday night. Scarborough: trashing the economy, insulting small business owners that wake up early in the morning, go to bed late at night, trying to make their businesses work, trashing entrepreneurs, trashing the people that make our economy the strongest in the world, trashing Mika, and I know this is personal for you, just for security reasons, I won't say who it is, but trashing people like one of your relatives who could have done anything, who could have gotten a job on Wall Street if he wanted to, could have gotten a job on Main Street if he wanted to, but decided to go into the United States Marine Corps, decided to give everything he had to be a Marine, and he won't say where he is right now, but it ain't Miami Beach in spring break, and it's going to be a long, tough haul for him. He did it voluntarily. Brzezinski. Many Americans do this. Scarborough. That story is recounted every day by thousands and thousands of young men and women, some coming from immigrant families, just like a lot of immigrants, whether you're talking about World War II or whether you're talking about the Korea War or Vietnam, a lot of immigrants coming in and deciding that they wanted to be a bigger part of this country. And Donald Trump insults our men and women in uniform every day, every single day. And I will say again, we know him. But who in the audience continues to cheer as this man trashes our men and women in uniform while you sit and watch cable news? These young men and women in uniform go through basic training. They kill themselves. They sacrifice their lives. They get assigned to go somewhere across the globe for 3 years, committed to one thing: protecting and defending you, protecting and defending your rights, protecting and defending the United States of America. And you trash them and you vote for a man who trashes them. That is just shameless. The 2024 primary marks the fourth time I have voted for President Trump. I backed him in the 2016 general election, both the 2020 primary and general election, and this fall, I will make it a solid 5 times. My lone moment of weakness was in the 2016 Texas primary when I got my arm twisted into backing someone I struggle to support today, Ted Cruz, although I always loved how Trump cleared the field of people, well, people like you. Yes, I know you were a Republican when you were in Congress all those years ago, playing a phony role in the days before the internet readily revealed who made the biggest contributions and therefore controlled your political energies and proclivities. This isn't intended to get into baseline political corruption, such as the clear fact that politicians supposedly making just $174,000 annually while living in one of the most expensive markets in America fight, claw, scratch, and scream to maintain that job, almost as if they are making millions more than advertised on back-end deals. The purpose is to address the utter bullshit you spewed about military families and, by extension, veterans in the aftermath of Trump's emphatic wins on Tuesday night. Usually, I only use profanity for emphasis, and I use it sparingly. But since that was your method of operation and has been for some time, you can deal with it. The military-industrial complex has preyed upon the minds of patriotic men and women for more than a century to boost enlistment numbers, whether a draft was in place or not. I am of the opinion that our nation has not fought a war of necessity since World War II, when we were sandwiched between two great powers who were marching their separate ways to victory and an inevitable conclusion against our country on our own soil. Since then, because we've grown so rich, fat, happy, and unfortunately corrupt, we fight wars of choice like the Roman Empire did as our country decays from within. Most post 9/11 veterans, the ones who were targeted with propaganda so strong we once thought it was our God-directed duty to try and control Stone Age warlords in far-flung shitholes for years at a time, see the truth after 2 decades of constant strife. I had very little interaction with death as a young man, outside of accidents involving classmates once in a while or deaths of elderly family members. Since I put on a uniform, I've lost countless peers and friends to suicide. A permanent solution to temporary problems, largely brought on by the waste of life investment spent fighting wars we could never win. Military marriages have a 70% likelihood of divorce. Those who come back physically intact are often not mentally intact. I worked on battalion staff when I was in Afghanistan, and the worst enemy contact I experienced personally was periodic mortar or rocket dodging, and I have to dig deep to unwind myself in my own everyday life, a consequence of dealing with high stakes, pursuit of the enemy, and constant stress and expectations brought about by being away from loved ones and a support network for up to a year at a time. I am one of the lucky ones. Some of my closest friends are heavily medicated and have fought off depression that nearly claimed their lives at the end of a shotgun. My own family, one with a rich tradition of Army officership dating back to November 6, 1963, in an unbroken streak, came to understand PTSD well by dealing with a Vietnam veteran father who served heroically as an infantry officer for 3 tours in another war that could not be won. We never knew if we would get smacked or praised, or if he would be home at 5 p.m. or 5 a.m. It took a year in a combat zone for me fully to understand him and the damage in his life that caused him to take his pain out on people he truly loved. When I read his letters he sent at the end of his life, I know how he really felt about me, but his trauma prevented that from being what was normal in my world while he was alive. I do support the military, just as I support law enforcement, under one condition: when they abide by the oath, the rule of law, and the defense of the Constitution. We do not support the use of our military as world police, those of us unlike you, who have heard shots fired in anger or popped a squat in the woods in a pair of combat boots now understand why the Afghans have gone unconquered for 1,000 years in their ancient pile of rocks the size of Texas. The Taliban are fond of saying, "You have the watches, we have the time." The British and the Russians learned these lessons long ago, that they will wait us out. Politicians and your ilk saw an opportunity to cash in on the big business of war, saw a gold mine after 9/11 and sent us there, and then to Iraq to do their bidding, knowing no meaningful victory would ever come from it. Now, the consequences are clear. Just as my father's post-Vietnam military sat in drug-addicted ruins, today's military is full of quislings and wimps in the highest levels of leadership who are hell-bent on ridding the ranks of Billy Bob from the hills of North Georgia and Joe Ray from the thorny woods of East Texas, those good old boys who stormed the beaches, climbed the mountains, and braved winter in the Ardennes with little more than a rifle in hand. I smelled this weakness coming upon the military as a junior captain in 2013, over a decade ago. Looking at what has happened to our military today with its relaxed fitness and grooming standards and forced social experimentation, we seemed like a group of Spartan warriors back then. The goal of the military is to fight and win the nation's wars. By virtue of that, it has no choice but to discriminate and position itself for nothing short of victory. The institution does not exist to validate immigrants, empower women, or provide people a space to feel good about who they think they are. It is, in fact, the very first task of drill sergeants in basic training to break individuals and reconstruct them as fighting machines, capable of functioning in the shittiest and most austere conditions the world has to offer. Most of us who are on the sane side of military service, meaning out of it, would not consider ourselves pacifists. I support justified use of the military in that it is used explicitly to defend the homeland. The Taliban don't have the ability to project military power across the oceans and ransack our homeland. They and other like-minded terror fronts have found a way to pose a threat to the homeland by taking advantage of the non-existent southern border and otherwise loose immigration laws that fail to scrutinize which new arrivals actually have values that would fit in a society that does not stone women for learning how to read like they do over there. We support President Trump, as do a majority of current service members, because he wasn't looking for the first opportunity to involve our soldiers in more trillion-dollar conflicts that satisfy defense contractors at the cost of American lives, minds, limbs, and families. I am thankful I served, because I developed real-life leadership skills and learned how to deal with people I couldn't stand or didn't respect in a way to keep the mission moving forward. I and others like me raised my right hand voluntarily, and even though I was bright-eyed and naive, I did it because I thought military service equaled a love of country. Love of country also requires us to stand up to the government of our country when it is wrong, and time tells the true tale. It has been wrong on foreign policy and war longer than anyone reading this letter has been alive. You do not understand the hearts and minds of soldiers, and you are far removed from anyone outside of your bubble who would sit down and explain these senseless deaths, both over there and back here at home, that have stemmed from committing countless hundreds of thousands of veterans to defending lands that will never know peace because the cause of jihad demands constant turmoil against the infidel. By now, you should understand why veterans and most rank-and-file military members support President Trump and his vision for peace in the world. We have seen enough of the ugliness of the world and, by virtue of having to survive in such horrible conditions, have grown wise to the ways of those who would never have the courage to live up to one of the most time-honored leadership rules of the military service. Never order someone to do a task you would not be willing to do yourself. President Trump is right about the military. It is being led straight to hell by a feckless leadership appointed for its political allegiance and controlled by the promise of pension. Those who fail to recognize it only enable it, and those who served this nation and recognize it will speak the truth about our evil, reckless foreign policy and the direct sabotage of the United States military by those who swore an oath to place the interests of the nation above all others. Sincerely, Seth Keshel, former Army captain and OEF veteran. All right, that barn burner of a piece was from my friend Seth Keshel. That was fun to read, dude. Really just wonderful writing and a wonderful flair for what's the term I'm looking for? A wonderful flair for ability to convey emotion convincingly without being melodramatic. It's really good stuff. That was really good stuff. All right, let's go back to Work Smart, Not Hard. This time, my friend Brian Cates. Mark Elias is scared, and he should be. The lawfare being used to try to stop President Trump is failing. By Brian Cates. This week on Super Tuesday, President Donald J. Trump is set to have a very historic day as the trend of his garnering massive primary wins continues, much to the horror of those who planned and plotted for well over 4 years now to prevent even a ghost of a chance of a return to the White House by the Teflon Don. Top Democrat lawyer Mark Elias, that party's go-to guy for rigging and stealing elections, is starting to show his panic. Nobody knows better than Elias does that if this election is held under the current parameters, a Trump versus Biden rematch where Trump will soon be leading in all the polls, Trump is already well beyond the margin of vote fraud this time. Therefore, it is imperative for Biden that his opponent is not Trump. But thus far, the massive amounts of civil and criminal lawfare being deployed against Trump has not had the anticipated results. Watch this clip that Elias put up on his X account, where you can see the panic rising in him. Mark E. Elias on Twitter. There is no reason Trump can't stand trial in September. There is no reason Trump can't stand trial in October. There is no reason Trump can't be in trial on Election Day. There is no constitutional right to avoid trial because you are running for office. As I've been saying for a while now, It probably looked very good on paper when the lawfare strategy script was written down and planned out and very likely war-gamed out with the tabletop exercise over 2 years ago. But what I've also been saying is that Trump constantly lures and baits these dumbasses into underestimating him. They cannot see him accurately, so they continue to be bewildered and confused about why all their plotting against him never seems to pay off. If you cannot see the opponent you are fighting with any accuracy, then the strategies you will end up deploying against them will fail you. Also, you will not accurately predict or see your opponent's moves against you. This inability to see Trump accurately or understand what counter moves would be made has led to this present situation where the outrageous, over-the-top civil judgments against him in New York City generated massive support and sympathy for Trump at the blatant unfairness of the rulings. At the same time, in their eagerness to file an absurd 2020 election RICO case against Trump and 18 other defendants in Fulton County, Georgia, Trump's enemies never noticed that they were entrusting a pair of opportunistic and incompetent affirmative action hires with this historic prosecution. Entrusting the prosecution of the former president and his key legal advisors to Fatty Willis and her covert lover, Nathan Wade, has now boomeranged massively on the lawfare strategists. It's a foregone conclusion at this point that both Willis and Wade will be removed from the case, possibly even disbarred. Should that happen, there is a genuine chance the entire case will be dismissed, since Fulton County authorities would be faced with the prospect of having to assign a new prosecutor who would have to start all over again from scratch. Such a new prosecution case with a new prosecution team would never be ready to take Trump and his co-defendants to trial before this November. And wasn't that the entire point of the whole thing? Meanwhile, since Special Counsel Jack Smith's attempts to bring Trump to trial in both Washington, D.C. and Palm Beach before the 2024 election is held are now delayed indefinitely. As several rulings are awaited from the Supreme Court, it is looking increasingly as if the last best chance to convict Trump of a criminal offense before the election resides with Manhattan District Attorney Alvin Bragg. Bragg is bringing Trump to trial on March 25th on a series of felony counts related to filing false financial documents. The problem with the case is the star witness Bragg will be swearing in before the jury former Trump Organization lawyer Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen has already admitted to having lied under oath multiple times, both to the U.S. Congress and in court proceedings. Although it will be a New York City jury hearing the case, the fact the star witness is a serial perjurer could present a genuine problem for Bragg in securing a conviction. Even if Trump is convicted, he will instantly appeal and be free on bond as he continues campaigning for office. And you can be sure that Mark Elias knows all of this. From the comments Elias makes in the video, it's apparent that what most concerns him right now is SCOTUS, taking up the presidential immunity issue, as well as accepting the legal brief filed by former Attorney General Edwin Meese regarding the possible illegal manner in which current Attorney General Merrick Garland bestowed special counsel status on Jack Smith, who at the time was still a mere private citizen. Elias, like a lot of Trump's enemies, has been hoping for 2 years now that it would be Smith taking Trump to criminal trials before the election. It was of paramount importance to the lawfare strategists that Trump be convicted of either leading/inciting an insurrection on January 6th or of stealing and illegally retaining classified documents at Mar-a-Lago before the 2024 election was held. It would be even better if he were convicted of both before the election. This is what has Mark Elias and a lot of other people who honestly expected this to unfold differently in such a panic right now. Due to the Supreme Court stepping in, the chances of Smith being able to bring Trump to trial in D.C. or Palm Beach before this year's November elections are fading. These people were counting on all this lawfare and election interference to severely damage Trump's attempts to campaign during this upcoming crucially historic American election, and it's just not happening. The last thing they ever wanted to see appears to be taking shape with a mere 8 months to go before the election. Trump looking more vigorous, vibrant, and energetic than ever as he goes head-to-head with an increasingly frail, confused, and uninterested Joe Biden. Ain't life grand? And that's the latest from Brian Cates. And finally, I'm going to read a piece from sigmagame.substack.com, Vox Day's new blog. I just love this stuff, so I'm going to read it. This is about the sociosexual hierarchy. And if you're not familiar with the sociosexual hierarchy, check it out at sigmagame.substack.com. Refers to the way that men form hierarchies and the various types in the hierarchy. And they're always males. This is about men, not women. That's a different topic of study. Okay, let's begin. This is entitled The Gamma Rage Trigger, from sigmagame.substack.com, a demonstration of the extreme emotional sensitivity of the gamma. We talked about delta narcissism last week. Now, let's contemplate the gamma variety, which is far more sensitive and can be triggered by even the slightest hint of rejection by any woman or higher status male. I've been a public figure for a long time, beginning with my weekly column in the St. Paul Pioneer Press, which was featured on the front page of the tech section and sported a headshot of me at the top, followed by national syndication of that column in 13 newspapers that included the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the Boston Globe, and the San Jose Mercury News, in addition to feature pieces in computer gaming world and electronic entertainment. People have been paying attention to what I say on one platform or another since 1994. And, of course, taking shots at me, although I didn't receive my first death threats until 2001. So, I'm not only accustomed to praise and criticism, but after 30 years, I am pretty well inured to both and mostly uninterested in hearing either. Over time, it gradually became undeniable that both criticism and praise alike tend to say far more about the individual bestowing it than it does about my work, let alone myself. This is not to say no criticism or praise is valid, you understand, and just that it's seldom very well informed or even relevant to me. So I'm simply not interested in paying attention to criticism or would-be correction from the usual sort of drive-by reader who is most likely to provide it, and experience has taught me that there is absolutely no point whatsoever in engaging in online debate with commenters. I presently have 35,200 followers on Gab, and in the hopes of dissuading at least a few of the usual suspects, I pinned this advisory to the top of my account there a few years ago. Fair warning. All shills, gammas, retards, critics, pedants, and social justice warriors are muted and blocked on sight. I am not interested in debate, discourse, or actually in this medium. If you disagree with what I post, that's absolutely fine, but please note that I am not at all interested in hearing your opinions, corrections, or criticisms. Use your own microphone. I will not permit you to attempt to hijack or parasitize mine. In other words, go ahead and criticize what I've posted all you like, but do it in your own space. Don't bring it to my attention or post it in my timeline. I'm not interested. I won't read it, and I won't respond to it, so don't bother. This is perfectly fine with most people, and it's observably unobjectionable to the tens of thousands of people who follow me. But as you might expect, it is like waving a red flag in front of a very angry bull for a certain sociosexual hierarchy behavioral profile when they happen to come across a post of mine. Gammas. Gammas take the idea that you are not interested in their very important opinions very, very poorly indeed. They view your lack of interest in their opinions as an insult, a rejection, and a public declaration of their inferiority all rolled into one. They are so sensitive that even the slightest hint of rejection feels to them as if salt is being poured into their psychological wounds. By way of example, here are just a few of the reactions to absolutely nothing more than coming across the 4 sentences quoted above. Fuck you, block me too, you're nothing but an angry Democrat. Go back to Facebook, creep. Fuck you, douchebag, block. But if you don't care to listen to other people's opinions and views, then how can you have any of your own? Did all your opinions just pop into your head one day? You didn't get them from reading books or watching documentaries or listening to people debate and argue on issues. They just came to you in a dream or something, and they're there to stay and can never change? Damn, you low-T betas are hard up for a hero. LARPing, posturing, nothing more. Tyranny is not troubled, concerned, or fearful in the least. As always, the swill is frenetically consumed by the deluded, Kool-Aid gorging masses of pathological gullibility. Hot damn tamale, you sound like a raging, closeted homo fucking pussy. Laughy face, laughy face, laughy face, laughy face. Arrogance extreme. I'll save you the trouble. I'll block you first, asshole. In other words, you fear a challenge that might change your view on how everything works. That's what an open forum is for, to challenge other views than your own and discuss intelligently what is different to see whether or not your view or other views may be in error, yes? I have no idea who you are, lol. Block me next, faggot. This makes you sound weak. I don't even know who you are, but you sure sound like a faggot to me. I won't tolerate any of those hurty words. I can't deal with the emotional fallout that comes from any criticism of my opinions. Jesus, I feel like I just caught AIDS from your weak-ass gap flex. Writers from Teen Vogue have thicker skin than you do. Faggot. This might have been my favorite response given the way it, in combination with the responder's self-description, perfectly demonstrates textbook gamma incoherence and a flawless delusion bubble. You're getting dragged, homo. Or, I'm caustic and abrasive. Just letting you know before you read any further, the truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself. Augustine of Hippo. Have primary sources to support your claim to shut the fuck up. Notice how criticism, or getting dragged, is assumed to be a big deal and to render one worthy of being laughed at, and is presumably something to be avoided at all costs. There is also the customary posturing about being amused rather than angry, but even more informative is the incongruity between the public posture that affects higher status indifference and the reality of the gamma's desperate need to seek validation from others. Now, contemplate the extreme insecurity and the amount of constant rage that must be constantly bubbling below the surface every day in the individual who is capable of reacting to someone else's indifference to his opinion in such an unrestrained manner. Even taking into account the way in which the anonymity of being online tends to encourage behavioral extremes, there has to be a disturbingly high level of underlying sensitivity and anger in order for it to be publicly expressed in this manner in response to such a minor and impersonal provocation. This, I suspect, is why women react to gammas with horror, contempt, and disgust, and why they are so drawn to men who are cool and indifferent. Their reactions are based on instinctive fear of the bubbling emotional heat of the former, while they feel safe and relaxed in the proximity of a man they sense will be able to handle their potential rejection with equanimity. Imagine being a pretty woman who is all too aware of the rage volcano just waiting to erupt in her face at the first moment of disappointment or lack of interest. Wouldn't you want to stay literal miles away from any man who showed signs of that constantly boiling anger inside him? Wouldn't you want to avoid any possibility that sooner or later you're going to inadvertently trigger those exposed sensitivities and focus that bitterness and rage upon yourself? This line of thought suggests something that we already know, but underlines its importance. To raise your perceived sociosexual hierarchy rank, you must learn to restrain and tame your emotions to the point that they are virtually undetectable by others. This is not because there is anything wrong with having emotions, since everyone does, but because the control over them it demonstrates makes you an intrinsically more reliable and therefore inherently more valuable man in the eyes of other men and women alike. That is sigmagame.substack.com. Thank you all for being here. Go to epicthreads.tv. I do anticipate a brief interruption in the supply of angel paste. We have some rows left. We have unscented. We are out of orange. Just go to epicthreads.tv. Place your order there. Promo code Shapiro to pry $1 from my grasping hands. Thank you so much, everybody, for watching. Let us pray. Saint Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray, and do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all evil spirits who prowl about the world seeking the ruin of souls. Amen. I love you all. Thank you so much for being here, and I'll see you next time.
I will be the greatest president that God ever created.